There is one currency, though, that is anything but boring. It has done very, 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 very well against the dollar. It is a virtual currency called Bitcoin. Bitcoins don't exist in the physical world, just on computers. At the beginning of the year, a Bitcoin was worth about $20.
This morning, I think it hit $180.
So if you had bought one at the beginning of the year, it would be worth 10 times as much now?
Yes. Yeah, it's crazy.
You guys are always asking, what is money anyway? And how do people decide that little pieces of paper or metal are actually worth something?
I mean, Bitcoins, they're not just some way to pay for things electronically. They are much weirder and more interesting than that. I mean, most currencies have some government behind them, right? Like the dollar or the euro. But Bitcoins do not. They're supposed to be a kind of universal virtual currency. And it's a really interesting experiment that tells you a lot about what a currency really is and what it's supposed to do. The way that Bitcoins came about is this great little internet fairy tale. So we're going to start by playing a section from that previous show we did that explains how Bitcoins were born. It's about 4.5 minutes long, and you'll hear Jacob and me talking with Gavin Andreessen, the guy you heard at the top.
The idea started with a guy named Satoshi Nakamoto. He's a bit of a mysterious figure. We're not sure if Satoshi Nakamoto is his real name. He doesn't give interviews, and I've only ever interacted with him via email and electronically on the Bitcoin forums.
Are you Satoshi Nakamoto?
I am not Satoshi Nakamoto.
Do you have any sense for Satoshi? Has he ever made a joke in an email or anything?
He never has. It's
Or she?
always
Who
been
knows?
it or them.
Oh, them.
Them. I like them.
Always is strictly business, just about kind of the Bitcoin project and the code.
Creating a new currency is really complicated. How do you prevent people from making counterfeit Bitcoins? How do you make sure that someone can't spend the same Bitcoin twice? You know, I send it to you, I send it to Caitlin.
Well, whoever Satoshi Nakamoto is, he or she or they came up with really a pretty clever system. There's no center to the whole thing. It's not like one computer somewhere is storing all the information. Bitcoin isn't run by a corporation. It's not run by any nonprofit group. It's what computer geeks call a peer-to-peer system. It's run by everybody who uses Bitcoin. And Gavin says because of that, you don't even have to trust Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever that may be.
If you have the technical know-how, you can look at every line of code in it and see what it does. And it cannot be changed unless a majority of the people who are running the software decide that it ought to be changed. So you're trusting the collective wisdom of all of the people who are using Bitcoin not to screw it up. For me, that's more comforting than thinking that politicians or central bankers won't screw it up. I actually trust the wisdom of the crowds more. It seems like they have better incentives to make sure the system works.
Now, David, there's no way either of us is going to look at this code and understand it. But even assuming that Gavin and the other programmers who've looked at it are right, you know, when they say that it sets up this beautiful self-sustaining system and it doesn't require any central authority, there's still this other really weird problem. When you're creating a new currency, one that just didn't exist at all before, how do you get the money out there in the world in a fair way? You don't want to just give it to your friends. You want to make people work for it.
So here's how Satoshi did it. He decided he would make Bitcoins like a computerized version of gold. Just like gold, there would be a finite amount of Bitcoins out there in the world. And the coins would first enter the economy through mining. People would mine for Bitcoins with their computers.
And what this means, what mining means in the case of Bitcoin, is you download a computer program and then you run it, and your computer grinds away at this very computationally intense puzzle. If your computer solves it, you get some Bitcoins. It turns out, David, we are late to this Bitcoin prospecting game. The Bitcoin gold rush, it's basically already happened. And the more people who are looking for Bitcoins, the harder it is for any one person to find some. So if we'd been doing this, last year when Bitcoin was just getting off the ground, we would have had a good shot. But now, not so much. There are still people out there getting Bitcoins this way by mining them, but those people have these very powerful computers that can essentially run circles around our little laptop.
Jacob, it struck me at this point that whoever got in early on Bitcoins and dug up the first coins when they were easy to find, they are in a position to get really, really, really rich if this thing takes off.
Yeah, last year, one Bitcoin was worth just a few cents. As of today, one Bitcoin is worth more than $14.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here, David, because at this point, the rest of the reporting becomes wildly outdated. You guys spoke those words 21 months ago. $14 a Bitcoin has become, just check this out.
It's still going up, and it's big news.
Everyone is buzzing about Bitcoin as its total value tops $1 billion.
Now, from just $2 2 years ago, the value of the cyber cash has hit a record high of almost...
Bitcoins are booming. The price of one unit of the digital currency jumped during the past...
So we called back Gavin Andreessen, and we asked him, what happened?
It's been a constant kind of drumbeat of good news.
He said a handful of online businesses have started taking Bitcoin more seriously. Back in November, WordPress, this blogging site, it helps you build a blog, they made this big announcement that they'd start taking Bitcoins.
That kind of started the price increase. That was kind of the, big internet retailer giving Bitcoin a little bit of legitimacy. And that was followed by, Reddit, Mega for their mega uploads. And there have been several others, pretty big online merchants saying that they will accept Bitcoins for their products or services.
Also, he says, a hedge fund got interested in buying Bitcoins. A hedge fund in Malta.
And I just love saying that, hedge fund in Malta. It's I couldn't make that up.
And as these things happen, the price of Bitcoin started edging up.
Then it went really ballistic, and it's not clear exactly what the trigger was.
One explanation people have is this other piece of good news for Bitcoin. The U.S. Treasury Department came out with these guidelines about the Bitcoin exchanges that everyone uses to buy Bitcoins. Bitcoin does have this sketchy reputation. One reason people like it so much and like to use it is that they are anonymous. They're not traceable. It's just an online version of cash.
There have been news stories about websites where you can use Bitcoins to buy illegal drugs. And on that other Bitcoin show we did, Jacob and I talked to a lawyer who's told us it was unclear if it was even legal to launch a new currency in the United States. So when this new guidance from the Treasury came out, a lot of people saw it and said, oh, the government is saying it's okay to use Bitcoins.
The very same day that those regulations were released, something else big happened in the world. This other thing that fits perfectly into the narrative of why a currency that's not backed by any government might be the way of the future.
That thing was Cyprus. The Cyprus crisis hit the front pages. So, as you've heard on this show, Cyprus government is in a lot of debt. And the news on that day was that there was this plan afoot to take money from people's savings accounts. The law that passed only ended up applying to people with a lot of money in banks, but the whole thing freaked out a lot of ordinary people with money in banks. And this kind of story, it's perfect for Bitcoin. If you start losing faith in government, why not switch to a currency that doesn't depend on a government?
And to me, that triggered alarm bells that if they can do that in Cyprus, they could do that anywhere. It made me feel unsafe with my money, and I wondered what else I could do with it.
Meet Tom. He did not want us to use his last name. Tom is a radar scientist in the middle of the English countryside. People in Cyprus couldn't easily buy Bitcoins because their bank accounts were frozen. But Tom, in the middle of England, read about what was happening there and started reading up on Bitcoins. He found someone locally who would sell him some, this taxi driver.
I drove to a train station and met a taxi driver there who dealt in Bitcoin, and I had to hand over 10, £20 notes.
Before handing over the money, he watched the taxi driver press this little button on his phone, and he heard the beep of Bitcoins being transferred into his new online account. He said it was thrilling and a little sketchy.
I mean, I've never paid for sex, but it felt kind of like going to meet somebody you don't know and handing over dirty money.
So to summarize, the press writes about how people might be buying Bitcoins. Guy reads article, decides he wants to buy Bitcoins, and the price goes up. Media hype can be a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And we should say the Bitcoin market is not that big, so it doesn't take a ton of people buying or selling to push the price around. But still, for sure, a tenfold run-up in price, there has been a big uptick in interest in Bitcoins.
And you could imagine this would be good for Bitcoin's future as a legit currency. All this new interest, people wanting to own Bitcoins, the press taking notice and covering it a lot, including Felix Salmon, the finance blogger at Reuters.
They suddenly blew through $20, $30, $40, $50. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And so that's when I started paying attention again.